Room 412. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Los Angeles. The machines breathed softly around the dying billionaire. Daltrey Marsh sat beside his father's bed wearing the same wrinkled shirt he had slept in for 2 nights. Eyes swollen from grief, he refused to show anyone. One hand held Elwood Marsh's weak fingers. The other rested against the hospital blanket, like he was afraid. Letting go might make death come faster. Then the door opened. His wife walked in. Vivienne Marsh crossed the room slowly, elegant in cream silk, perfectly composed while relatives and nurses watched in silence. She stopped beside the bed, looked at the old man dying beneath the blankets, then looked at Daltrey, and something in her face disappeared. No warmth, no softness, no wife. She reached up calmly, slid the wedding ring off her finger, and dropped it onto the dying man's hospital bed. The sound was small, but in that room, it felt like a gunshot. "I don't need this anymore," Vivienne said. Daltrey stared at the ring. Outside the half-open hospital door, the hallway went completely silent, and somewhere beneath the steady beeping of the heart monitor, Elwood Marsh heard everything. How long does it take for a person to show you who they really are? Some people spend years building a mask so convincing that even their own reflection believes it. Vivienne Marsh had worn hers for 6 years. This hospital, this room, this night, this was where the mask began to slip. Stay with me. This gets ugly before it gets right. For years before that hospital room, back when everything looked beautiful, the Marshes stayed in Newport Beach. California sat behind iron gates on a bluff above the Pacific. Elwood sat at the head of his Thanksgiving table like a man who had built every inch of what surrounded him. Because he had. At his right side sat Vivienne. She had refilled his water glass without being asked. She laughed at his old stories. When the family attorney, Rutherford Kane, who had known Elwood 42 years, arrived late and breathless, it was Vivienne who stood, welcomed him warmly, and made sure he had a plate. Elwood watched her and thought, "My son chose well." He had no idea what was happening underneath that thought. Earlier that afternoon, Vivienne had pulled Daltrey's cousin Loretta Sims into the kitchen. "I just need someone to know," Vivienne whispered, eyes almost wet. "Daltrey has been difficult lately. He got angry last week, said things." A slow shake of her head. "I'm trying to be patient." Loretta had known Daltrey since he was 9. She had never seen a man raise his voice above a conversation. But Vivienne looked so genuinely worn that Loretta only said, "If you ever need anything." Vivienne was back at Elwood's side, smiling before the soup arrived. That was how it started. One person, one conversation, one careful lie dropped like ink into clear water. Over the following months, Vivienne worked through that family the way a skilled tailor works through fabric. Methodically, quietly, no visible seams. She told Bertrice, Elwood's housekeeper, that Daltrey was reckless with money. She told Wallace Marsh, Elwood's brother, that Daltrey was talking about selling off the business. She told Elwood himself, always gently, always framed as love, that his son spoke about him differently behind closed doors, never directly, always framed as concern. "I'm probably overreacting, but I just love this family so much." Elwood Marsh was a sharp man. But there is a particular blindness that comes with loving someone. You stop checking the seams. When the warmth between father and son began to cool, Elwood told himself it was discernment. It was poison. Slow, invisible, and effective. Have you ever been in a room where someone was lying about you and you had no idea? Where the people you loved were being quietly turned against you one conversation at a time? That was Daltrey's life. Fully unaware, fully loyal, fully exposed. And he never defended himself. Not once. Because defending yourself against your wife's words, to your own father, felt like a disrespect he was not willing to commit. He was raised to protect his family, not from his family. So he stayed quiet, and the silence was used against him. 9 months before the hospital, the Marsh quarterly family dinner, Newport Beach. The table was full. Wallace sat near the window. Loretta was there. Rutherford Kane had driven up from San Diego. Preston Vale, Marsh Capital's longtime CFO, 30 years in finance, sat across from Vivienne, watching her with the quiet attention of a man who spent his career spotting numbers that didn't belong. 15 minutes into dinner, Elwood set down his fork. "The Holloway acquisition," he said, eyes moving to Daltrey in a way that carried no warmth. "I heard concerns were raised internally, and you dismissed them." "Dad, the concerns were addressed. I presented a revised risk assessment to the board." "You dismissed them?" Elwood's voice didn't rise. It got quieter, which was somehow worse. "That is not how I built this company." Every eye in the room landed on Daltrey like weight. He did not argue. He said, "I hear you, Dad." From across the table, from behind a water glass lifted to her lips, Vivienne smiled. Just barely. Just enough for Preston Vale to see. Preston said nothing, but he filed it away. The way a man who reads numbers for 30 years files away a figure that doesn't fit. 3 weeks later, Elwood called Rutherford and said he wanted to look at the will again. Rutherford, who had watched Daltrey grow from a small boy who fell asleep under his father's desk, said carefully, "What's prompting this? I'm getting old. I want things in order." Rutherford said, "Of course," then hung up and sat still at his desk for a long time, because Rutherford had been watching too, and what he had been watching was not Daltrey. 6 weeks before the hospital, Elwood collapsed at his desk at 3 in the afternoon. Bert Rice found him unconscious on the study floor. She called 911. She called Daltrey. She did not call Vivienne, who was at a charity luncheon in Beverly Hills, because Bert Rice had the kind of feeling that women who work inside houses long enough develop about the people in them. Daltrey made it to Cedars-Sinai in 22 minutes. He found his father in a curtained bay and sat down and took his hand. Dr. Yvonne Ashby explained. Internal bleeding, suspected cardiac event, moving to the ICU. Daltrey heard the words, processed them, and then the words stopped meaning things for a moment because he was looking at his father's face, this face that had been cold and impossible toward him for months. And beneath all that, it was still just his father's face, the man who taught him to ride a bike in a Pasadena parking lot, the man who had slid his first business card across the table and said, "Now you're real." Daltrey put his forehead down on the side of the bed and stayed there. Vivienne arrived 40 minutes later. Cream blazer, perfect makeup. She touched Elwood's arm, spoke softly to nurses, told arriving relatives she had rushed straight here, devastated when she got the call. She had, in fact, finished her dessert first. What the hallway saw was a devoted daughter-in-law composed under pressure. What Bert Rice saw, standing near the door, watching Vivienne's eyes move around the room, the way eyes move when counting things, was something else. But Bert Rice was a housekeeper, so she kept quiet and kept watching. The ICU became Daltrey's world. He slept in the chair, learned the nurses' names, worked from a laptop, so he wouldn't have to leave. When Elwood was lucid, Daltrey was there. When Elwood slept, Daltrey stayed. Vivienne moved through that hospital the way a politician works a campaign event, befriending nurses, bringing food to the waiting room, crying at precisely the right moments for precisely the right people. In quiet corners she worked, on Wallace, who held a board seat, on Loretta, who had the family's ear, on Tanner Block, a mid-level Marsh Capital executive she had identified as ambitious, underpaid, and therefore useful. Then one afternoon, when Daltrey stepped out to take call, Vivienne sat close to the old man's bed. Elwood's eyes were open. She held his hand. Mr. Marsh. She never called him Dad. She always called him Mr. Marsh, and somehow that felt more genuine to him. "I'm scared. Daltrey is not the man you think he is. I've been protecting you for a long time. But with you here like this, I can't stay quiet. He is not strong enough to protect what you built." The machines beeped. Elwood said nothing, but his hand, slowly, almost imperceptibly, released hers. 3 floors below, in the hospital cafeteria, Daltrey was on the phone with Preston Vale, stabilizing a deal his father had been running when he collapsed. He had no idea what was being said upstairs. He was just trying to hold the company together, because that is what his father would want. Rutherford Kane had been making his own quiet moves. He had watched Vivienne for nearly a year, the way she asked certain questions about asset structures, the way she looked at the Newport Beach house, not with love, but with the measuring eye of someone calculating square footage. When Elwood called him from the hospital in a moment of frightening lucidity and said, "Rutherford, come, alone." Rutherford came. He listened. "She told me Daltrey is a risk to the company," Elwood said, voice rough but eyes clear. "She wants me to change the will." And I almost believed her. He stared at the ceiling. "I have been a fool, Rutherford. You have been a father. Those are sometimes the same thing. My son has slept in this room for 3 weeks. He has been running the company from that chair." He pointed to Daltrey's plastic chair against the wall. "And I let her make me doubt him." Then Elwood said, "I want 2 documents. 1 fake will. Give her what she thinks she wants. The mansion, company authority, the visible assets. Make it look real. Make it look iron." A pause. "And 1 real will. Everything that actually matters. Controlling shares, trusts, hidden investments, everything to Daltrey." Rutherford was quiet. "And the fake will?" Elwood looked at him with eyes that had spent 7 decades reading people. "Let her show me who she is." This old man. This clear-eyed, heartbroken, brilliant old man. He knew before she made her move. And he set the stage. Rutherford drew up both documents. The fake will look flawless. The Newport Beach mansion, operational authority over Marsh Capital, 3 luxury properties in California, Nevada, majority stake in the company's visible holding structure. To Rutherford's trained eye, it was a curated collection of liabilities, temporary administrative power, not ownership, debt-loaded properties, the least valuable pieces of the empire. But to someone who understood that these things existed without understanding how they worked, it looked like everything. 3 days before Elwood went into a coma, both were signed. The real went into Rutherford's vault. With Daltrey down the hall with Dr. Ashby, Rutherford showed Vivienne the fake. He watched her eyes move across the page. He watched the moment it landed. The mask slipped. Just 3 seconds. But Rutherford Kane had been watching human faces for 42 years. He saw it. 2 days later, Elwood slipped into a coma. The ICU waiting room filled. Partners, old friends, extended family. Daltrey stood at his father's bedside. His face was the face of a man past the edge of exhaustion, holding himself upright to the simple refusal to fall while his father was still breathing. And Vivienne walked in. She was dressed differently, put together in a way that wasn't about grief. The way you dress when you're going somewhere that matters. She crossed to the opposite side of the bed, looked at the old man lying there, then looked at Daltrey. Something in her face was different. In real time, like a stage light cutting off. The warmth, the concern, the careful softness, going, gone. She reached up to her left hand and took off her wedding ring. The room felt it before anyone understood what was happening. She held the ring a moment. That platinum band with the princess-cut diamond Daltrey had spent 4 months saving for before he even proposed. Then set it down on a hospital blanket, on the dying man's bed, right in front of Daltrey. The room went absolutely still. "I don't need this anymore," she said. Clear, flat, the voice of a closing statement. Daltrey stared at the ring. "Vivienne, you were only valuable because of him." She tilted her head toward Elwood. "Without his name, without his money, without this company, you are nothing. You have always been nothing." Someone in the doorway made a sound. She did not look at them. "You are weak," she said. "You are soft. You sat in that chair for 3 weeks, and I thought, this man cannot protect anything. He cannot protect the company. He cannot protect his own father from the reality that he is a disappointment." Daltrey's face did not go angry. It went quiet, the way a field goes quiet in the moment before weather arrives. "Get him out," Vivienne said to security near the door. A young guard looked between them, deeply uncomfortable. Daltrey held up one hand. "It's all right." He bent down, looked at his father's closed eyes, picked up the ring from the blanket, held it one moment, put it in his pocket. He walked to the door, stopped once, looked back, and in that exact moment, the heart monitor beside Elwood's bed produced a single brief, unmistakable spike. Not an alarm, not a medical event. One blip, like something hearing, like something still present. Rutherford Kane, standing near the back wall, saw it. He looked at Elwood, brilliant and heartbroken and motionless in that bed, and he thought, He heard her. Daltrey walked into the Los Angeles afternoon. He sat in his car in the parking structure, without moving. He did not cry. He was past the place where crying lives. He sat holding that ring in his palm, thinking about a Pasadena parking lot, and a bicycle, and a man who believed in him before he believed in himself. He closed his fist around the ring, sat straight, started the car. There is a particular quiet that settles over a room when a will is being read. Not peace. The quiet of people holding their breath. Old grief sitting in wooden chairs. Eyes pretending to study the floor while watching everyone else's face. The conference room at Kane and Associates Legal Group, downtown Los Angeles. Thursday morning, October. 12 people around the table. Vivienne Marsh sat at the center. Black blazer. Hair pulled back. The kind of posture that says, I am ready for what comes next. Across the table, Daltrey sat beside his Uncle Wallace, who looked old in a way he hadn't 6 months ago. At the head of the table, expression giving away nothing, Rutherford Kane. He cleared his throat and began. Rutherford read in the flat, neutral voice of a man who had read hundreds of wills. The Newport Beach mansion. Vivienne's chin lifted slightly. Administrative authority over Marsh Capital Group. Her fingers, folded on the table, pressed together once. 3 luxury properties, Malibu, Lake Tahoe, Las Vegas. The asset portfolio. When he finished, the room held its breath. Daltrey looked at the table, jaw set. The pain on his face was real, quiet, deep, the pain of watching his father's life's work handed to someone who never loved it. Vivienne looked at him and let herself smile. Not wide, not cruel, just enough. Rutherford removed his glasses. There is an addendum regarding Daltrey Marsh. He is to receive his father's personal belongings, the watch collection, the journals, the letters, and a sealed envelope, delivered privately. That was all. She received the empire. Daltrey received his father's watches and a letter. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they used to need, but no longer do. I think, she said to no one in particular, we should discuss the transition of the Newport Beach property. Rutherford gathered his papers. Of course. But for just a moment, his eyes found Daltrey's across the table. Something in that look Daltrey could not yet read. He would understand it soon. 3 days after the reading, Vivienne moved into the Newport Beach mansion, changed the gate code, had Daltrey's remaining belongings boxed and left at the end of the driveway. His father's cufflinks, a frame company photo, a jacket from the coat closet, 3 boxes on the asphalt in the Los Angeles sun. Daltrey pulled up in a rental car and loaded them without getting out. Then she called Briley Fontaine, lifestyle blogger, private dinner host for wealthy Los Angeles women, and said, come see the house. It's ours now. What followed was 6 weeks that Marsh Capital employees would later describe in stunned, disbelieving language. Vivienne arrived at headquarters in a blacked-out Range Rover, walked into Elwood's office. Photographs still on the walls, awards still in the cases. Sat his chair and called a company-wide meeting. She introduced herself as the new operational authority of Marsh Capital Group. Preston Vale, the CFO, sat in the back and said nothing. He texted his lawyer that afternoon. Clifford Jude, a senior partner who had managed the Holloway acquisition, submitted his resignation the same day. Vivienne accepted it without reading it. She was already ordering new furniture for the executive floor. On the surface, on the Instagram post, luxury car in the driveway surface, Vivienne looked like she had won. But here is what happens when someone takes control of a company they do not understand. The cracks start small. Week 2, a lending group called Haverford Pacific sent a letter about a debt covenant requiring quarterly certification from a licensed operational officer. 90 days uncertified. Vivienne was not a licensed officer of any kind. 30 days to remedy, or the debt would be called. Her assistant brought it to her desk. She looked at it, set aside, and went back to her office renovation concepts. Week 3. 2 Malibu commercial tenants exercised a review clause triggered by the management change. They were exiting. Together, 40% of monthly revenue. Gone. Week 4. The IRS sent a notice. Preston Vale brought it to her personally and stood in Elwood's office. Cedars-Sinai, photograph, awarded, and laid the paper on her desk. Mrs. Marsh. The operational structure of this company runs on relationships Elwood spent 30 years building. They are tied to him. Without a licensed successor who understands the architecture of what he built, this company will not survive the next quarter. Are you telling me how to run my company? I am telling you what the numbers say. He walked out, resigned the next morning. Vivienne replaced him with Tanner Block, the underpaid mid-level executive she had been cultivating for months. Tanner Block had 4 years in finance. Preston Vale had 30. The distance between those two numbers was about to become very expensive. The Newport Beach mansion still looked beautiful from the outside. Vivienne hosted dinner parties. Private chef, mixologist, flowers that cost more than some people's rent. She posted. The comments said goals and queen behavior. She bought a Porsche, then another, converted the guest house into a studio for a podcast she planned to call Wealth Identity and Intentional Living. And underneath every purchased item and every photographed moment, the Marsh empire was doing what infrastructure does when no one is tending it, quietly collapsing. The Haverford Pacific debt was called. Vivienne's new attorney, cheaper firm, found through Briley's network, told her property was leveraged inside a larger financing structure. Unwinding it would affect several other assets. They delayed the fight. It cost money. The Malibu tenants left. The IRS notice became an audit. Then Tanner Block called on a Wednesday afternoon. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. When it ended, Vivienne sat in Elwood's chair and stared at the wall because Tanner had told her, careful, frightened, that the majority stake in the holding structure she controlled was actually administrative authority over an entity containing the least performing assets in the entire Marsh portfolio. The assets generating real income were held in a separate structure, a structure she had no authority over, one she did not even know existed. Feel the architecture of what Elwood Marsh and Rutherford Kane built. They didn't just create a fake will, they created a perfect mirror. Everything Vivienne saw looked exactly like what she wanted, and every piece was arranged so that the moment she grabbed it and ran, it would cost her more than she could pay. He handed her the rope and let her tie her own knots. 6 months after the will reading, a Los Angeles courtroom. Vivienne was not there by choice. Haverford Pacific had escalated to litigation. 3 other creditors filed simultaneously. The IRS audit produced findings. The Malibu property entered foreclosure. 2 of Tanner Block's decisions, made under pressure without adequate legal review, created additional exposure. Her legal team had grown larger, more expensive, and visibly less confident with each passing week. She sat at the plaintiff's table and looked across the room. Rutherford Kane at the other side. Behind him, quiet, straight-backed, in a dark suit that fit him correctly for the first time in months, sat Daltrey Marsh. He looked rested. Clear, not angry. That last part unsettled her most. She had prepared for his anger, his gloating, the face of a man watching someone fall. He looked like someone who had already moved past the falling, like a man watching rain he had long since come inside from. Rutherford stood. Before we address the contested estate assets, there's a recorded statement from Elwood Marsh, made before 2 witnesses and a notary, 22 days before his passing. The judge, Honorable Dianose, reviewed the documentation and said, "Proceed." Rutherford placed a small device on the table and pressed play. The voice that came out was rough. A sick man running out of time. But unmistakably Elwood Marsh. The voice that had commanded boardrooms and family dinner tables, an empire built from a single rented office in Pasadena. For minutes and 11 seconds, the courtroom did not move. I have spent my life reading people. It is the only skill that matters more than money, more than strategy. You have to read what a person wants, and what they are willing to do to get it. If you are hearing this, then my daughter-in-law has taken what she believed was offered to her. In doing so, she has shown this court exactly who she is. I was not confused. I was not a dying man being taken advantage of. I was an old man who made one mistake, letting someone stand between me and my son, and I spent the last weeks of my life correcting it. The document she received was constructed deliberately. Every asset selected to expose, not reward. I knew what she wanted. I knew she would take it, and the truth of her character would be visible to anyone paying attention. My real wishes are in the document Rutherford holds. They never changed. My son, Daltrey Elwood Marsh, was and remains the sole heir to everything that matters. Vivienne, if you are in this room, I do not hate you. I am too old for hate. But you use my love for my son against me. You use my age, my illness, and my trust against the one person who deserved none of that. And for that, I leave you nothing. Not out of cruelty, because you taught me in the end exactly what you valued. And it was never my family. Rutherford, close it out. Make sure my boy is all right. That's all. The recording ended. Vivienne's attorney leaned toward her, rapid and low. She was not listening. She was staring at the device on the table, as if she could not process what had just come out of it. Then she looked at Daltrey. And for the first real time, something moved across her face that was not performance, not strategy. The face of someone who had just understood the full shape of what they had done. Not regret exactly. Closer to recognition. The recognition of someone who had been running a very long race and just realized they were running the wrong direction the entire time. Rutherford placed the real will on the table. The judge authenticated it. Ironclad. 42 years of legal craftsmanship in every line. The controlling shares of Marsh Capital Group. The ones generating real income. The ones representing what Elwood had spent his life building. The hidden investment portfolio. The family trusts. The endowments. The real estate holdings carrying no debt. All of it. Daltrey. Vivienne received what the FACL had assigned her, which meant, after creditors, litigation costs, and unwound debt structures, she received very nearly nothing. The Porsche was repossessed on the courthouse steps, not metaphorically. When she walked out, 2 repossession agents were already there. One had paperwork. The other had a flatbed truck. There were reporters, cameras, a crowd of former colleagues and neighbors who had attended her charity event and later felt foolish about it. Vivienne stood on those courthouse steps in her black blazer and watched them take the car. Then she started walking. People always want to know what happened to her afterward. I'll tell you, but sit with something first. The fall of a person who has done terrible things is not always satisfying the way we expect. Sometimes it is just sad. Not sad in a way that excuses anything. Sad in the way waste is sad. Vivienne Marsh was not born calculating. Somewhere at some point she made choices. Small ones first, then larger ones, then choices that cannot be undone. That is a human story. The most human story there is. But the rain does not care about your reasons. It just falls. 7 months after courtroom, Briley Fontaine had stopped returning calls when the repossession story ran. The dinner party women scattered the way people scatter when association become the liability. Vivienne was living in a weekly rate motel in Inglewood, a universe away from Newport Beach in every way that mattered. 2 jobs, pressing clothes at a dry cleaning shop on Crenshaw Boulevard, a machine steaming her face every time she leaned in close. Night shift cashier at a 24-hour pharmacy where her name tag said VIV, and she learned to say have a good night to people who never looked at her face. No car. The bus. 22 pounds gone. Not from health. From a particular weight loss that comes from eating whatever is cheapest and worrying through hours that should be sleep. On a Thursday night in March, it rained in Los Angeles the way it only rains 4 or 5 times a year. Completely violently, as if the sky had been saving it. Vivienne sat at a bus stop 2 blocks from the hospital. That hospital, Cedars-Sinai, was visible from the bench. Upper floors lit against the dark sky. That institutional glow that looks the same at 2 a.m. as at noon. She sat with a plastic bag over her shoulders because she kept telling herself she would buy an umbrella tomorrow. Then the convoy came. 3 black vehicles, moving with the unhurried confidence of people the world adjusts for. They stopped at the building adjacent to the hospital. A new building with a sign. She could read through the rain. The Elwood Marsh Community Health Center. Opening spring. The center vehicle opened. Daltrey Marsh stepped out in a dark coat, talking to a woman in a hard hat, architect or project manager, pointing toward the entrance. Focused, unhurried, he had the attention of a man who had found his footing. He looked whole, not triumphant. Whole, the way a person looks when they're doing the thing they were built to do, in honor of something they love, with no one in the way. Vivienne pulled the plastic bag tighter and turned her face away. Not fast enough. Daltrey scanned the street the way you scan streets at night, automatically without thinking, and saw the bus stop, saw the figure on the bench, and stopped. She was already looking down at the gutter, at the water running along the curb, when she noticed something small and metallic caught against the drain cover, spinning slowly in the current. She reached down, picked it up. A ring, not her ring. Not the ring she had thrown onto a dying man's hospital blanket in front of a room full of witnesses. Just a ring, cheap, thin, dark from the street, lost from someone's hand months ago. She held it in her palm, and sitting in that rain, holding a stranger's ring, with that health center lit up ahead of her and Daltrey's convoy behind her, Vivienne Marsh started to cry. Not the careful, performed crying she had deployed in hospital hallways and kitchens, and beside old men's beds. The other kind, the kind that comes from somewhere so far down it surprises you. The kind that have been waiting behind all the calculation and strategy and relentless forward motion, waiting for one unguarded moment to come through. The rain fell. She cried without dignity and without audience. Daltrey saw her, recognized her the way you recognize a place from a dream. The shape is right before your mind confirms what your eyes already know. He stood still. The woman beside him started to speak. He held up one hand. She stopped. He looked at Vivienne, at the plastic bag on her shoulders, at the way she was folded over that bench, at the rain running down her hair. Something moved through him. Not anger, not satisfaction. Something quieter. Something that had his father in it. Something that sounded like, "I am too old for hate." He reached into his coat pocket and took out a card. He handed it to the woman beside him with something said too low to carry across the street. She nodded. He looked at Vivienne one more time and walked into the building. Not coldly, not dramatically, just walked in. The woman crossed the street and held the card out. Vivienne looked up, eyes wet, and took it. It was a card for the Elwood Marsh Community Health Center. On the back, in Daltrey Square, careful handwriting, a name and a number, a case manager for employment and housing transition services. That was all. No message, no speech, just a name and a number left in the rain for the woman who had tried to destroy him, because he was his father's son, and his father had meant it when he said, "I do not hate you," and Daltrey had been raised in the image of that man. Vivienne turned the card over. Read the front. Read the back. The rain began to ease. The bus came. She got on and sat in the back with the card in her lap, and the small dark ring still in her fist. She did not cry anymore. She had no strategy. No next move being assembled behind her eyes. She just sat, and the bus moved through the wet Los Angeles streets, the city sliding past the windows, indifferent, enormous, full of people carrying their own stories of their own rain. 2 years later, Marsh Capital Group was running at its strongest performance in a decade. Daltrey restructured leadership, brought in people who knew the work and believed in it. Preston Vale came back. He said, "This company deserved better than what it got for those 6 months. I want to be here when it gets back." It got back. The Elwood Marsh Community Health Center opened in April, serving low-income patients across 3 Los Angeles neighborhoods. Daltrey attended the ribbon cutting quietly. No press release, no hired photographers. Just the cutting, just the opening of the doors, just his father's name on a building that helped people. That was enough. The employment case manager connected Vivienne with administrative work at a nonprofit in Culver City. Nothing glamorous. She took it. She did not call Daltrey, did not try to explain or reopen anything. She held the card the way people hold certain objects, not as a plan, but as a marker of a moment when someone chose to be better than the situation required. Whether she became a different person, that part of the story is still being written. In someone's rain-soaked, forward-moving life. That is the end. And if you stayed all the way here, if you sat with Daltrey in that hospital chair, felt the ring hit that blanket, heard Elwood's voice come through that courtroom speaker, then you already know this was never about the money. It was about what people do when no one is watching. It was about the difference between wanting to win and being worth something. Dropa comment. Was Daltrey too kind at the end? Or was that the bravest thing he did in the whole story? Like this video if you believe the truth always finds its moment. Share it with someone who needs to hear that loyalty is not weakness. Subscribe, because the next story is already waiting. I'll see you there.